Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about history is written by the winners, but in the world of cinema, some of the greatest stories so ambitious, so controversial, or so cursed that they collapsed under their own weight before a single frame was finished. These are the masterpieces. They live only in the imaginations of legendary directors and the dusty archives of Hollywood studios. Today we are opening the vault to explore 8 incredible films that could have changed the course of movie history forever. From sprawling historical epics to bizarre sci-fi experiments, these are the visions that were too big, too weird, too dangerous for the world to handle. We'll look at the lost scripts, the insane concept art, and the heartbreaking reasons why these icons of what if never saw the light of day. Prepare to enter the Ghost Archive, the greatest cinema you will never see. Stan Lee. Kubrick was a man defined by a level of perfectionism that bordered on madness. But his greatest obsession, the one that haunted him until his final breath, was his unproduced biopic of Napoleon Bonaparte. Following the monumental success of 2001, A Space Odyssey, Kubrick didn't just want to make a historical movie. He wanted to create the definitive cinematic document of the 19th century. A film so accurate and grand that it would effectively replace history books. His preparation was staggering. A feat of research that remains unparalleled in Hollywood history. Kubrick amassed a personal library of over 500 books on the French Emperor and created a massive, handwritten card catalog containing over 15,000 meticulously cross-referenced notes on every person in Napoleon's inner circle, tracking their movements across Europe day by day. He sent assistants to travel across the continent, collecting samples of the actual soil from battlefields like Waterloo to ensure the color and texture on screen would be authentic. His vision for the production was equally insane. He negotiated with the Romanian government to borrow 40,000 infantry soldiers and 10,000 cavalry to act as extras. Planning to film massive candlelight and grand palaces, Kubrick intended for the film to be a 3-hour mix that explored not just the tactical genius of the conqueror but the intimate, psychological decay of a man who owned the world but lost his soul. However, the project hit a wall of cold corporate reality. Major studios, terrified by the ballooning budget and the commercial failure of another Napoleonic film released at the time, suddenly pulled their funding. Kubrick was left with an 800-page screenplay, thousands of sketches for costumes made of specialized paper, and a vision that was simply too big for the world to handle. Today, Kubrick's Napoleon exists only as a legendary ghost movie, a haunting reminder of what happens when a director's genius outpaces the industry's courage, leaving us to forever wonder how the master of cinema would have reimagined the rise and fall of history's most complex tyrant. The Starverse forever. The story of Tim Burton's Superman Lives remains one of the most bizarre and fascinating chapters in the graveyard of unproduced cinema. A project that promised to deconstruct the Man of Steel through the lens of gothic isolation and Burton-esque 1990s counterculture. In 1996, Warner Brothers sought to reboot their most iconic franchise by hiring Kevin Smith to write a script based on the death of Superman comic arc. But the project took a turn for the surreal when Tim Burton was brought on to direct, with the legendary Nicolas Cage cast as Clark Kent. This wasn't going to be the wholesome, patriotic Superman of the past. Burton and Cage envisioned a hero who felt like a literal alien, a socially awkward outcast who was terrified of his own godlike power. The production spent millions of dollars on pre-production, creating mind-bending concept art that replaced the traditional spandex suit with a bioorganic iridescent regeneration suit that glowed with internal energy. Nicolas Cage famously participated in costume tests wearing a long-haired, muscular prosthetic suit that looked more like a creature from a fever dream than a superhero. The plot was equally strange, featuring a spider-like Brainiac, a depressed Lex Luthor, and a giant robotic spider in the third act. specific demand from the producer that became a Hollywood legend. Burton's vision was a dark, operatic exploration of identity and alien nature. But as the budget spiraled toward an unheard-of $190 million and previous big-budget failures scared the studio, Warner Brothers pulled the plug just weeks before filming was set to begin. The film collapsed under the weight of its own eccentricity, leaving behind only grainy test footage of Cage in the glowing suit and a script that felt more like a psychedelic nightmare than a summer blockbuster. It remains a ghost of a movie that reminds us of a time when Hollywood was willing to be truly weird, leaving fans to forever wonder if Nicolas Cage's Superman would have been a misunderstood masterpiece or a spectacular disaster that would have changed the superhero genre a decade before the MCU was even a dream. The sequel to Ridley Scott's Gladiator is now a reality, but the version that almost existed in the mid-2000s is widely considered the most insane screenplay ever written for a major Hollywood studio. After the massive success of the first film, Wrestle, Crowe didn't want the story of Maximus Decimus Meridius to end with his death. So he personally recruited the poetic musician Nick Cave to write a script that would bring his character back to life. Cave, who had never written a blockbuster before, produced a screenplay titled Christ Killer that defied every convention of the historical epic. The story begins with Maximus in a bleak purgatorial afterlife, where he is tasked by the Roman gods who are dying and losing their power to a new, singular deity to return to Earth and assassinate Jesus Christ and his followers. Maximus is resurrected, but instead of a simple revenge story, he becomes an immortal warrior, cursed to fight through every major conflict in human history. The script featured mind-bending sequences where Maximus battles through the Crusades, the World Wars, and even the Vietnam War, eventually ending with him as a high-ranking official in the modern-day Pentagon. It was a meditation on the eternal nature of violence and the tragedy of a man who can never find peace because he is the literal avatar of war. While Ridley Scott was fascinated by the sheer audacity of the idea, the studio executives were understandably terrified by a pitch that involved the hero of a beloved historical drama trying to kill the Messiah. The project was deemed unfilmable and too sacrilegious for a mainstream audience, leaving Cave's script to circulate as a legendary underground document. It remains a ghost of a movie that would have transformed a Sandals Ann's Hordes epic into a metaphysical, time-traveling odyssey, proving that sometimes the most creative ideas are simply too dangerous for the silver screen to contain. Before the Marvel Cinematic Universe changed the world, and long before Zack Snyder's vision divided fans, the legendary director of Mad Max, George Miller, was only weeks away from filming the ultimate superhero epic, Justice League Mortal. In 2007, this wasn't just a script. It was a fully realized production based in Australia with a complete cast, including Armie Hammer as Batman and DJ Katrona as Superman. Miller's vision was a high-octane, incredibly violent, and emotionally grounded story that drew inspiration from the Tower of Babel comic arc where Batman's secret files on how to defeat his own teammates are stolen by villains. The production was staggering in its detail. Weta Workshop had already built specialized tactical suits for the entire league, and the film featured massive set pieces involving a mind-controlled Superman fighting Wonder Woman in a battle that would have leveled an entire city. Unlike modern superhero films that rely heavily on green screen, Miller planned to use practical stunts and innovative motion capture technology to make the Flash's speed and the Martian Manhunter's shape-shifting feel visceral and terrifying. The film was designed to be a standalone masterpiece with a dark, Shakespearean tone, where heroes weren't just icons, but flawed mortal beings capable of absolute destruction. However, a perfect storm of disasters struck the project. A massive writer's strike halted the script's final polish, and the Australian government denied the production crucial tax credits at the last second. Warner Brothers, suddenly nervous about the massive $220 million budget and the looming success of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, pulled the plug just as the cameras were being loaded. The film collapsed into a ghost of cinema, leaving behind only rare photos of the cast in their costumes, and a legendary script that remains, for many, the holy grail of superhero movies that never was. In 2015, the internet exploded when Neil Blomkamp, the visionary director of District 9, released unofficial concept art for a new alien film that promised to do the impossible. Ignore the divisive sequels, Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, and provide a true, satisfying conclusion to Ellen Ripley's story. The project, often referred to as Alien 5, was a love letter to James Cameron's Aliens, featuring a battle-scarred Ripley and an adult Newt returning to face the xenomorph threat on a grand, industrial scale. Blomkamp's vision was gritty, tactile, and terrifying, utilizing practical effects and animatronics to bring back the biomechanical horror of H.R. Giger's original designs. Sigourney Weaver was so impressed by the pitch that she officially signed on to star, and Michael Biehn was set to return as Corporal Hicks. The concept art teased massive Weyland-Yutani facilities, terrifying new xenomorph mutations, and Ripley wearing a specialized organic suit that hinted at a deeper connection to the alien biology. It was the sequel fans had been dreaming of for 30 years, a high-stakes, action horror masterpiece that focused on the emotional weight of Ripley's trauma. However, as Blomkamp's production gained momentum, Ridley Scott decided to return to the franchise with Alien Covenant, fearing that Blomkamp's direct sequel would confuse the timeline of his own prequels. Scott used his influence as producer to effectively stall and then cancel the project. Alien 5 became a ghost in the machine, a lost chapter of one of cinema's most iconic sagas that exists only in beautiful, haunting illustrations of a future that was snatched away from fans just as it was within reach. Mood of Ronnie Rocket was too pure to be unstrained by a traditional film production. So he let it die, though its DNA bled into almost everything he made later, from the industrial textures of the Elephant Man to the extra-dimensional spaces of Twin Peaks. It remains the ultimate ghost movie of the undergrounder, masterpiece of pure imagination that exists only in the mind of the man who dreamt it, a reminder that some stories are too strange even for the silver screen. The Ghost Archive of cinema is a powerful reminder that some of the most influential ideas in history never actually made it to the screen. These 8 films, Kubrick's obsessed Napoleon, Jodorowsky's psychedelic Dune, Burton's Alien Superman, and the rest prove that the failure to produce a movie doesn't mean the vision dies. These projects survived as scripts, concept art, and legends, inspiring the directors and artists who eventually built the blockbusters we love today. They represent the what-ifs of our culture, movies that were too grand, too weird, or too honest for the systems that were supposed to fund them. Perhaps it is better that they remain unfilmed, existing in their perfect, uncompromised form within our imaginations, rather than being diluted by studio notes or technical limitations. They remind us that the true power of cinema isn't just in the projected light on a theater wall, but in the boundless, untamed creativity of the human spirit that refuses to stop dreaming, even when the cameras never roll. Thank you for exploring the vault of lost masterpieces with me. Stay curious, keep dreaming of the impossible, and I'll see you in the next one.